Breathe in slowly. And out. Let your body grow heavy and warm. The story of Rome continues. We have watched Rome born from legend. We have seen its Senate debate and its Colosseum roar. We have marched with its legions across the known world. But now we come to one man. A man so extraordinary, so brilliant, so dangerous, that Rome itself could not contain him. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. And nothing about Rome, nothing about the entire Western world, would ever be the same after him. He was born in 100 BC, into an old Roman family, noble by name, but not particularly wealthy or powerful by the standards of the Roman aristocracy. A young man with everything to prove, and the burning, restless energy to prove it. From childhood, Caesar was remarkable. He was educated in the finest tradition of Roman aristocracy, rhetoric, philosophy, military strategy. He had a mind that absorbed everything and forgot nothing. His teachers recognized early that this boy was different. Not just intelligent, many boys were intelligent. But Caesar had something rarer. He understood people. He knew instinctively what made a man feel important, what made a crowd love you, what made a soldier follow you into certain death without hesitation. This gift, this deep, almost supernatural understanding of human nature, would carry him further than any sword ever could. As a young man, he was captured by pirates in the Mediterranean Sea. Most men would have been terrified. Caesar was annoyed. He told the pirates their ransom demand was too low, insulting really for a man of his importance. He demanded they raise it. He spent his captivity writing poetry and giving speeches, and promising the pirates cheerfully that he would return and crucify them all. They laughed. He was not joking. When he was released, Caesar raised a small fleet, hunted the pirates down, and crucified every single one of them, exactly as he had promised. Rome heard the story and laughed with delight. This was the kind of man Romans loved: bold, decisive, true to his word even when his word was a threat. Caesar entered politics young, and from his very first steps in the Forum, he understood something that most Roman aristocrats did not. Power did not come only from old families and old money. Power came from the people. The ordinary Romans, the shopkeepers, and soldiers and farmers, who had no voice in the Senate but whose support could make or break any political career. Caesar courted them shamelessly. He threw lavish public games. He paid for festivals. He built public buildings. He remembered names, thousands of names, and greeted common soldiers by name years after meeting them once. They loved him for it. Completely. Unreservedly. With the fierce loyalty that ordinary people give to the rare powerful man who actually sees them. Caesar's military career began in earnest when he was given command of Roman forces in Gaul, the vast territory we now call France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland. It was 58 BC. He was 42 years old, and what he achieved in the next 8 years was almost beyond belief. He conquered all of Gaul, an enormous territory, home to hundreds of fierce Celtic tribes who had been fighting Romans and each other for generations. Caesar did it in 8 years, through a combination of brilliant military tactics, ruthless efficiency, and an almost supernatural ability to adapt to whatever situation he found himself in. He crossed the Rhine into Germania, the first Roman general to do so, just to show the Germanic tribes that Rome could reach them if it chose. He crossed the Channel and invaded Britain twice, again largely to make a point. No one had done these things before. Everyone said they were impossible. Caesar did them anyway. Back in Rome, Caesar's enemies watched his growing power with increasing alarm. Chief among them was Pompey, once Caesar's ally, now his greatest rival. The Senate, manipulated by Caesar's enemies, issued an ultimatum. Caesar must give up his command, dismiss his armies, return to Rome as a private citizen. If he crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper, with his army, it would be an act of war against the Roman state. Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon in January of 49 BC, his army behind him, Rome ahead. He knew exactly what crossing meant. Civil war. Either he would win everything or lose everything, including his life. He paused for a long moment, and then he said the words that have echoed through history ever since. The die is cast, and he crossed. The civil war was swift. Pompey and his allies fled to Greece. Caesar swept through Italy almost without resistance, so fast, so decisive, that cities opened their gates before he even arrived. He followed Pompey to Greece, defeated him at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt, and was murdered there by the Egyptian court, who hoped to please Caesar with the gift. Caesar wept when they brought him Pompey's head. Pompey had been his enemy, but he had also been his son-in-law once, a great Roman, a man who deserved a Roman death, not an Egyptian dagger in the back on a beach. In Egypt, Caesar met Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, 21 years old, brilliant, politically astute, and utterly determined to secure Roman support for her throne. She had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, rolled in a carpet. Caesar was charmed completely. They became allies, then lovers. And Rome had one more story to tell about its extraordinary general. Caesar returned to Rome in triumph. He was now the undisputed master of the Roman world. His enemies defeated, his power absolute. He was appointed dictator, not the emergency temporary office of the early republic, but dictator perpetual, dictator forever. He ruled with extraordinary energy. He reformed the calendar. The Julian calendar he created, adjusted slightly, is still the basis of the calendar we use today. When you check today's date, you are using a system Julius Caesar designed. He reformed the Senate, extended Roman citizenship, built new public buildings, planned new colonies for Rome's veterans. He was working at a pace that exhausted everyone around him, as if he knew somehow that his time was limited, as if he could feel what was coming. His enemies were gathering, men who called themselves liberators, men who believed, some sincerely, some selfishly, that Caesar's power was a threat to the Republic. They loved. Led by Brutus and Cassius, they formed a conspiracy. Caesar's friends warned him. His wife Calpurnia dreamed of his murder and begged him not to go to the Senate on the Ides of March, the 15th day of March, 44 BC. Even a soothsayer in the Forum called out to him as he passed, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar smiled. "The Ides of March have come," he said. "Aye, Caesar," the soothsayer replied, "but not yet gone." Caesar went anyway, because Caesar had never in his life allowed fear to make his decisions for him, and he was not about to start now. The Senate chamber was full that morning. Caesar took his seat, and the conspirators moved. 23 senators, each with a concealed blade. The first blow struck Caesar's neck. He grabbed the arm of his attacker. But then the others came, all at once, from every side. 23 wounds. Caesar fought. Of course he fought. Because he was Caesar and he had never stopped fighting in his life. But there were too many of them. When he saw Brutus among them, Brutus, whom he had loved like a son, the old stories say he stopped fighting. He pulled his toga over his face and fell at the base of a statue of Pompeii, his old rival, his old enemy. As if even in death, Rome could not resist a sense of the dramatic. Julius Caesar died on the floor of the Senate. March 15, 44 BC. The most powerful man in the world, killed by the men he trusted most. The conspirators had expected relief, a grateful city, a restored republic. Instead, Rome exploded. The people, Caesar's people, the ordinary Romans who had loved him, took to the streets in grief and fury. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, stood before the crowd at Caesar's funeral and read his will aloud. Caesar had left money to every Roman citizen. His gardens, his private gardens, he left to the people of Rome. Forever. The crowd wept. And then they turned on the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius fled the city. The liberators had killed Caesar. But they had not killed what Caesar represented. The idea that one man, with enough vision and enough courage, could take broken Rome and make it whole. That idea lived on in the young man sailing back from Apollonia when he heard the news. The 18-year-old who would become Augustus, who would finish what Caesar started, and build the empire that would last 1,000 years. The Senate declared Caesar a god. Divus Julius, the divine Julius. A temple was built in his honor, in the Forum, on the exact spot where his funeral pyre had burned. For centuries after his death, Romans left flowers there. Ordinary people, not commanded to, not required to, just remembering. A man who had seen them, who had known their names, who had thrown them festivals and built them buildings and crossed impossible rivers and conquered impossible territories and come home to them in triumph again and again. A man who had been killed not by enemies but by colleagues, not on a battlefield but in a meeting room. The most Roman of endings for the most Roman of men. Julius Caesar. Soldier, politician, writer, lover, conqueror. The man who made the world hold its breath and changed it forever with a single step across a cold Italian river. Let the Forum grow quiet now. Let the flowers on Caesar's memorial sway gently in the warm Roman evening breeze. Let the stars come out above the Capitoline hill, the same stars that watched him cross the Rubicon, that watched him weep for Pompeii, that watched him fall on the Senate floor. Eternal stars above an eternal city. The story of Rome continues. But tonight, let Caesar rest. He has earned it. and let us rest with him. Breathe slowly now. In and out. Breathe in slowly and out. Let the warmth of sleep settle over you. The story of Rome continues. We have walked with Caesar across the Rubicon. We have watched him conquer the world and fall in the Senate. Now, we look upward, beyond the marble temples and the smoke of sacrifice, beyond the prayers of a million Romans rising into the Italian sky. We enter the divine world of Rome. The gods. Rome had many gods. Not one, not two, hundreds. A vast, complicated, endlessly fascinating family of divine beings who watched over every aspect of Roman life, from the grandest affairs of empire to the smallest moments of an ordinary day. There was a god for war, a goddess for love, a god for the sea, a goddess for the harvest, a god for doorways, a god for beginnings, even a god for sewers. Rome left nothing unprotected, nothing unwatched, nothing without its divine guardian. At the top of the Roman divine order sat Jupiter, king of the gods, lord of the sky, the thunder, the lightning, protector of Rome itself. His great temple on the Capitoline Hill was the most sacred spot in the entire empire. Every triumph, every great military victory celebration ended at Jupiter's temple. The victorious general would climb the Capitoline Hill in his chariot dressed in purple and gold and give thanks to Jupiter before all of Rome, because every Roman victory was ultimately Jupiter's victory. Jupiter's wife was Juno, goddess of marriage, of women, of the state, fierce and proud, and not always in agreement with her husband. Their daughter was Minerva, goddess of wisdom and crafts, and strategic warfare. The Romans associated her with the Greek Athena, and like Athena, she was depicted with an owl, symbol of wisdom, perched on her shoulder. These three, Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, formed the great Capitoline triad, the divine heart of Rome. But no god was more important to Rome's daily reality than Mars, god of war. Father, according to legend, of Romulus himself, Mars was everywhere in Roman life. His month, Martius, gave us March, the great parade ground outside Rome's walls was the Campus Martius, the field of Mars, where armies trained and citizens assembled. Before every military campaign, Roman generals sacrificed at Mars's temple. After every victory, they gave thanks there. The Roman army, that extraordinary machine that built and defended the empire, understood itself as Mars's instrument on earth. Every soldier who raised his gladius in battle was, in some sense, acting for Mars. Every drop of blood spilled on the battlefield was an offering to the god of war. It sounds brutal to modern ears, but to Romans it was simply the truth of the world they lived in. War was real. War was constant. And a god who understood war, who governed it, who could be appealed to, who might tip the balance in your favor, was a god worth honoring with everything you had. Not all Roman gods were gods of war. Venus, goddess of love and beauty, was perhaps the most beloved deity in the entire Roman world. She was claimed by the Julian family, Caesar's family, as their divine ancestor. Venus, they said, was the mother of Aeneas, the Trojan hero, who came to Italy and whose descendants founded Rome, which meant that Julius Caesar, and after him Augustus, were literally descended from a goddess. Convenient. Perhaps suspiciously convenient. But Romans believed it, or at least accepted it, because it made a kind of poetic sense that the family, which had produced Rome's greatest men, should have divine blood in their veins. Venus's temple in the Forum of Caesar was one of Rome's most beautiful. Roman women came there to pray for love and for marriage and for the safety of their children. They brought offerings of flowers, roses especially, Venus's sacred flower. The smell of roses and incense mixed in the warm air of the Forum, a small moment of beauty in the center of the world's most powerful city. At the heart of the Roman Forum stood a small round temple, modest compared to the grand temples of Jupiter and Mars, but perhaps the most sacred place in all of Rome, the Temple of Vesta. Vesta was goddess of the hearth, of the sacred fire that burned at the center of every Roman home. But her temple fire was different. It was Rome's fire, the eternal flame that represented the life of the city itself. As long as Vesta's fire burned, Rome would endure. If it went out, disaster would follow. The fire was tended by 6 women, the Vestal virgins, chosen in childhood from Rome's best families, serving for 30 years, living in the house of the Vestals beside the temple, in considerable comfort and extraordinary privilege. Vestals had rights that no other Roman women possessed. They could own property. They could free condemned prisoners by their word alone. They had reserved seats at the games, better seats than most senators. In return for one thing, the fire must never go out. It never did. For over 1,000 years, Vesta's flame burned in the Forum. Rome endured. Religion in Rome was not only about grand temples and public ceremony. It lived in every Roman home. In the corner of almost every Roman house stood a small shrine, the Lararium, a miniature temple, really, painted on the wall or built from wood or stone, decorated with small figurines of the gods. Here lived the Lares, the household gods, the divine protectors of the family, the home, the farmland. Every morning, the Roman family would stop at the Lararium before beginning their day. A small offering, a bit of food, a splash of wine, a pinch of incense, placed before the figures, a few words of prayer. Then the day would begin. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, and the most profound, because it meant that every Roman day began with a moment of connection to something larger than oneself, a recognition that the family did not exist alone, that invisible presences watched over them, cared for them, could be appealed to in times of trouble. Religion, for Romans, was not something you did once a week. It was woven into every hour of every day. Romans believed the gods communicated with the living world constantly, through science, through omens. The flight of birds could tell you whether a military campaign would succeed. The condition of a sacrificed animal's liver could reveal the will of the gods. Thunder on the left was a good sign. Thunder on the right was bad. There were priests whose entire job was to read these signs. The augurs, interpreters of bird flight and divine signs. The haruspices, readers of sacrificial animal entrails. before any major decision. A military campaign, a political election, the founding of a new colony. The omens were consulted. Generals waited for favorable birds. Before marching into battle, consuls postponed elections if thunder interrupted the ceremony. To modern minds this seems like superstition. But consider what it gave the Romans. A framework for uncertainty. A way of making terrible decisions. Whether to go to war, whether to sign a treaty, whether to trust an ally, feel less arbitrary. The gods had spoken. The choice was made. Move forward without doubt. In a world where doubt could get you killed, that certainty was worth everything. As Rome's empire grew, something remarkable happened. The gods grew too. Rome absorbed the religions of every people it conquered. Greek gods merged with Roman ones. Jupiter became Zeus, Mars became Ares, Venus became Aphrodite. The same divine stories told in two languages, two traditions weaving together into something new. From Egypt came Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, whose cult spread through the entire Roman world. From Persia came Mithras, a sun god whose mystery cult was particularly popular among Roman soldiers. From Asia Minor came Cybele, the great mother goddess. Rome welcomed them all. The Roman religious mind was extraordinarily inclusive. If a god existed somewhere in the empire, that god was real. That god deserved respect. That god might be useful. Better to honor every god than to insult one through ignorance. This openness, this religious generosity, helped hold the empire together. Every people could worship their own gods, as long as they also honored Rome. And then there was the strangest Roman religion of all, the worship of the emperors themselves. It began with Julius Caesar, declared a god by the Senate after his death. Then Augustus, who carefully avoided claiming divinity while alive but accepted that his adopted father Caesar was divine, making him the son of a god. After Augustus, it became standard. Dead emperors were declared divine, deified by the Senate. Temples were built to them, priests appointed, sacrifices offered. In the eastern provinces especially, where the tradition of divine kingship was ancient and natural, emperor worship was genuine and widespread. It served a purpose beyond religion. A living emperor who might be flawed, corrupt, cruel, was just a man, but a divine emperor, an emperor connected to the sacred order of the universe, was something to be obeyed. Without question, power wrapped in the divine is the most durable power of all. Rome understood this and used it. And then came a new faith, quietly at first, almost invisibly. A small group of followers of a Jewish teacher from Nazareth, executed by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate in the province of Judea around 30 AD. His followers called him the Christ, the Anointed One. They said he had risen from the dead. Rome barely noticed at first. The empire was full of new religions, new prophets, new gods arriving from the east. One more seemed unremarkable. But this one was different. It spread along Rome's own roads. The roads built by the legions. The roads that connected every corner of the empire. It spread through Rome's own language, Latin and Greek, the languages of commerce and administration. It offered something the old Roman religion could not quite give, a personal relationship with the divine, a God who knew your name, who loved you specifically, who promised something beyond this life. To the poor, the enslaved, the hopeless, this was revolutionary. For 3 centuries, Rome persecuted the Christians, intermittently, sometimes brutally. They were thrown to lions in the very Colosseum we have already visited, used as human torches in Nero's gardens, blamed for Rome's disasters, the fire of Rome, the plague, the military defeats on the frontier. They refused to worship the emperor. In a world where emperor worship was a political loyalty test, this made them dangerous, subversive, un-Roman. And yet the faith kept growing, until the morning in 312 AD when the Emperor Constantine stood before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, the battle that would decide who ruled Rome, and saw, he later said, a vision in the sky, a cross of light, and the words, "In this sign conquer." Constantine won the battle, and Christianity won the empire. Within a century, the old gods, Jupiter and Mars and Venus and all the divine family that had watched over Rome since Romulus first plowed his furrow, were fading. The temples fell silent. The eternal fire of Vesta was extinguished. After 1,000 years, the old Rome was gone, and a new one, Christian, medieval, eternal in its own way, was just beginning. Let the incense smoke rise slowly now. Let it drift upward past the marble columns, past the golden statues, past the eternal flame, up into the dark Italian sky, where the stars have always burned. The gods of Rome are quiet tonight. Jupiter rests on his golden throne. Mars lays down his sword. Venus tends her garden of roses in the moonlight, and we rest with them in the warm darkness between the human world and the divine one, where sleep lives. Breathe slowly now, in and out. We have walked with Caesar across the Rubicon. We have stood in Rome's temples and felt the presence of its gods. Now, we travel south, down the long Roman road that leads away from the capital, through the green hills of Campania toward the blue glittering waters of the Bay of Naples, to a city that time forgot, not because it was unimportant, but because time stopped there. Suddenly, completely, forever. We are going to Pompeii, a city of 20,000 people, frozen in a single morning. On the 24th of August 79 AD, the day the mountain woke up. Pompeii was a beautiful city. Not Rome, nothing was Rome, but beautiful in its own way. Prosperous, lively, full of the energy of a port city that traded with the entire Mediterranean world. It sat on a plateau of hardened lava, ironic in hindsight, about a mile from the sea, in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. Vesuvius was simply part of the landscape, a backdrop, a green and peaceful mountain, whose slopes were covered in vineyards and farms. The Romans knew it was an old volcano. Some of the more learned ones suspected it might not be entirely dead, but it had been quiet for so long, centuries of silence, that the people of Pompeii had stopped thinking about it. The mountain was just there, like a hill, like furniture, like something that had always been and would always be. They were wrong. The mountain had been holding its breath for a very long time, and on that August morning, in 79 AD, it exhaled. The first sign came at noon. A column of smoke and ash rose from the summit of Vesuvius, not slowly, not gently, with a sound like nothing anyone in Pompeii had ever heard. A deep, enormous, earth-shaking crack that was felt as much as heard. The column rose, and rose, and rose, 20 kilometers into the sky. The Roman writer Pliny the Younger watched it from across the bay. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, commanded the Roman fleet there, and described the shape of the eruption column as like a pine tree, a giant umbrella of smoke and ash and rock spreading at the top as it hit the upper atmosphere. Beautiful in a terrible way. The people of Pompeii stared. Some ran immediately, pouring out through the city gates, streaming down the roads toward the coast, toward safety. Others waited. Surely it would stop. Surely the mountain would quiet again. It had always quieted before, hadn't it? The ash began to fall. First like snow, small, light, pumice stones raining down from the dark sky. Strange, alarming, but survivable. People tied pillows to their heads with cloth, improvised helmets against the falling stones. They moved through the streets in the eerie half-darkness of an ash-filled afternoon sky. Hours passed. The pumice fell deeper and deeper. Roofs began to collapse under the accumulating weight. The streets filled ankle-deep, then knee-deep with ash and pumice. And still some people stayed. They were waiting to see what they had left behind. Their homes, their shops, their money hidden beneath the floor, their animals, the things that represented their entire lives. How do you walk away from everything you have ever known? How do you leave your home when you still hope, still believe that it will be there when you return? Many of them never got the chance to find out. In the early morning hours of August 25th, the volcano changed. The eruption column collapsed. And what came next was something no Roman had any word for. A pyroclastic surge. A fast-moving wave of superheated gas and ash and rock, traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour, moving down the slopes of Vesuvius toward the coast, toward Pompeii. The temperature at its leading edge exceeded 300 degrees. Nothing in its path survived. The people of Pompeii who had stayed too long, who had waited too hopefully, died in seconds, not from burning, from the heat and the gases, which were so overwhelming that death came before the body could register pain. Instantaneous, complete. And then the ash fell, meters of it, covering the city like a blanket, like a hand pressed gently over a sleeping face, and Pompeii disappeared. For 1700 years, Pompeii slept beneath the ash. The world moved on above it. New cities were built. Old ones fell. Empires rose and collapsed. Christianity came to Rome. The Western Empire fell. The Middle Ages came and went. The Renaissance bloomed. And beneath all of it, Pompeii waited, perfectly preserved. The ash that had killed it had also protected it. No air reached the buried city. No water. No decay. The wooden furniture survived. The food on the tables. The paintings on the walls. Still bright after 17 centuries of darkness. The graffiti scratched by board. Teenagers on street corners. The election notices painted in red on building facades. The price lists in the shops. The personal messages, the jokes. The declarations of love and hatred that ordinary people scratch into walls when they think no one important is watching. All of it survived, waiting for someone to find it. When archaeologists began serious excavation in the 18th and 19th centuries, they discovered something no one had expected. Cavities in the ash, human-shaped holes where bodies had once been. The flesh had long since decayed, but the ash around it had hardened perfectly, preserving the exact shape of each person at the moment of their death. A brilliant archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli realized what the cavities were and began filling them with plaster. The casts that emerged broke the hearts of everyone who saw them. A man covering his face with his hands, a woman holding an infant to her chest, a dog chained to a post, curled in its final position, a family huddled together in a back room, parents and children, arms around each other, waiting for it to stop, waiting for the world to become safe again. Across 2,000 years, those plaster figures reach across the silence of all that time and make the past completely real. But Pompeii is not only a story of death and disaster. It is the most intimate portrait of ordinary Roman life that exists anywhere on Earth, because the ash preserved everything. Walk through Pompeii today and you walk through a real Roman city, not a reconstruction, not an approximation. The actual streets, the actual buildings, the actual pavements, with the ruts worn by centuries of cartwheels, still visible in the stone, the stepping stones that let pedestrians cross flooded streets without getting their feet wet, spaced exactly right for a Roman stride. The thermopolia, the fast food restaurants with their terracotta pots still embedded in the stone counters, the bakeries with their stone mills still standing, loaves of bread found in the ovens, carbonized but perfectly shaped, the bakers' marks still visible on the crust. Bread baked 2,000 years ago, still wearing the shape of human hands that made it. The graffiti of Pompeii is perhaps the most human thing of all. Thousands of inscriptions, scratched or painted onto the walls of the city. Some are political, election endorsements, surprisingly modern in tone. Vote for Gaius Julius Polybius. He provides good bread. Some are romantic. Successus the weaver loves. Iris the innkeeper's slave girl. Some are rude. Very rude. In ways that remind you that human nature has not changed in 2,000 years. Some are philosophical. Nothing lasts forever. Written by someone who could not have known how prophetic those words would prove for the city they lived in. And one inscription, found in a Pompeii tavern, perhaps the most touching of all. I have spoken. You have drunk. Each of you take your jugs and go home. The words of a tavern keeper, calling time on a long night, 2,000 years ago, in a city that would be buried before sunrise. Pompeii today receives millions of visitors every year. They come from every country on Earth, and they all do the same thing. They walk the ancient streets and grow quiet. It happens automatically, without instruction. The noise of the modern world falls away, and in its place comes something harder to name, a sense of presence, of proximity to lives that were real and complete and full of small daily concerns. What to eat for dinner, whether the new wine was good, what the neighbors were arguing about, and were ended so suddenly, so completely by something so far beyond human control. Pompeii reminds us gently of something we prefer not to think about, that ordinary life is precious, precisely because it is fragile, that the morning routine, the bread and the fountain, and the walk to the market, is not nothing, it is everything, it is all we have, and it is enough. At night, when the visitors leave, and the gates close, Pompeii is alone again, the way it was for 1700 years. The moon rises over Vesuvius. Quiet now, always quiet now. Those scientists know it. Will not be quiet forever. Moonlight falls on the ancient streets, on the stepping stones, worn smooth by Roman sandals, on the fountain where people stop to drink, on hot August afternoons, on the walls where someone scratched their name 2,000 years ago. Still there, still legible, proof that they existed, that they walked these streets, that they loved and argued, and ate bread and watched the mountain and thought, it would always be like this. The stars above Pompeii are the same stars that watched the eruption, the same stars that watched the ash fall, the same stars that have watched, patiently and without judgment, everything that human beings have built and lost since the beginning of time. They will be watching still, long after we are gone. Let that be a comfort, somehow, rather than a sorrow. Let Pompeii sleep now, under its blanket of moonlight and memory. Let the ancient streets grow quiet. Let the ghosts of 20,000 people rest in the silver silence of the Italian night. They lived fully. They loved deeply. They left their names on walls so that someone, someday, would know they were here. We know. We remember. And now we rest with them. Breathe slowly. In and out. The warmth of sleep surrounds you now, like the soft ash of a distant mountain. Gently, completely. Let the world grow quieter still. The story of Rome continues. We have walked with Caesar across the Rubicon. We have stood in the temples of Rome's gods. We have visited the frozen city of Pompeii. Now, we return to Rome itself, to the men who sat at the top of the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. The emperors. Not all of them were great. Some were mad. Some were cruel. Some were simply ordinary men, crushed by the weight of extraordinary power. But some were remarkable. Men whose vision and strength and wisdom shaped not just Rome but the entire course of human history. Tonight we meet the greatest of them, the men who made Rome what it was. The first and perhaps greatest was Augustus. We have already walked with him, watched him rise from an 18-year-old boy sailing back to Italy after Caesar's assassination to the undisputed master of the Roman world. But what made Augustus truly great was not his victory. It was what he did with it. He could have been a tyrant. He had every opportunity, every justification, every instrument of power needed to rule by pure force. He chose differently. He chose the patient, careful, enormously difficult work of building institutions that would outlast him. Roads, laws, a professional army, a civil service, A postal system, fire brigades, police, the infrastructure of civilization. Not glamorous work, not the stuff of legend, but the stuff that makes daily life possible for millions of ordinary people. Augustus understood something that few powerful men ever grasp: that the greatest legacy is not what you build for yourself, it is what you build for those who come after you. After Augustus came Tiberius, capable but cold, a brilliant general who became a deeply unhappy emperor. He retreated in his final years to the island of Capri, leaving Rome to be governed by his Praetorian prefect Sejanus, a dangerous and ambitious man who nearly seized power for himself. Tiberius eventually had Sejanus executed, but the damage was done. Paranoia had set in. The Senate walked on eggshells. Men were accused of treason on the flimsiest evidence. Tiberius died in 37 AD, possibly helped toward death by his successor, unmourned by Rome, a man who had everything the world could offer and found no happiness in any of it. Power, Tiberius proved, is not the same as contentment. The palace on Capri still stands, or its ruins do, looking out over the Bay of Naples, a beautiful view for a very lonely man. Then came Caligula. Oh, Caligula! He began well. The young successor, only 24 when he took the throne, was greeted with genuine joy. He was the son of the beloved General Germanicus. He had grown up in the army camps, beloved by the soldiers who called him by his nickname, Caligula, Little Boot, because as a small boy, he had worn tiny soldiers' boots in the camp. The people loved him for about 6 months, and then something went wrong. An illness, a breakdown, a personality that could not withstand the absolute, unchecked power of the imperial throne. The stories that came after, of madness and cruelty and bizarre behavior, may be exaggerated by historians who wrote long after his death. But something clearly broke. In Caligula, the promising young emperor became something Rome feared more than any foreign enemy. An emperor without restraint, without reason, without mercy. He was assassinated in 41 AD by his own Praetorian Guard. After less than 4 years on the throne, Rome breathed again. The Guard then did something remarkable. They went looking for the next emperor and found him hiding behind a curtain in the palace. His name was Claudius. He was 50 years old. He walked with a limp. He stammered when nervous. He had spent his entire life being dismissed by his family as slow, perhaps simple, kept away from public life because the imperial family was embarrassed by him. He had used that invisibility well. While emperors and their families played their deadly games of power, Claudius had been quietly reading everything: history, administration, law, military strategy, languages. When the Guard put him on the throne, everyone expected a disaster. They got one of Rome's better emperors. Claudius conquered Britain. The island Julius Caesar had twice invaded and twice failed to hold, now properly absorbed into the empire. He reformed the bureaucracy, extended citizenship, built harbors and aqueducts. The man everyone had dismissed as a fool had simply been waiting for his moment. It came at 50, and he made the most of it. Then came Nero. the most infamous name in Roman history. The emperor who, according to legend, played his lyre while Rome burned. The reality is more complicated. Nero began, like Caligula, with genuine promise. He was 17 when he came to power, guided by two remarkable advisors, his mother Agrippina and the philosopher Seneca. Under their guidance, the early years of Nero's reign were good ones for Rome. But Nero chafed at guidance. He had the absolute power of an emperor. He did not want advisors. He wanted to be an artist, a singer, a poet, an actor. He performed on stage, something no Roman emperor had ever done, something that Roman aristocratic society considered deeply shameful. He murdered his own mother. He kicked his pregnant wife to death. He blamed the Christians for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Whether he started it himself remains debated, and had them executed in the most brutal ways. He spent money the empire did not have on a golden palace, the Domus Aurea, so vast it covered an entire hillside. In 68 AD, the legions revolted. The Senate declared him a public enemy, and Nero, alone, abandoned, with soldiers coming for him, struggled to take his own life. He needed help at the end. His last words, according to the old stories: "What an artist dies with me." After the chaos that followed Nero's death, 4 emperors in a single year, Rome found stability again, in an unexpected place. A general from the Sabine Hills, practical, unpretentious, famously plain-spoken. His name was Vespasian. He had been commanding Roman forces in Judea, suppressing a major Jewish revolt. When the news came that yet another emperor had fallen, his troops declared him emperor. He marched on Rome, and Rome, exhausted by years of instability, accepted him with something close to relief. Vespasian was everything Nero had not been. Frugal where Nero had been extravagant, practical where Nero had been theatrical, hardworking where Nero had been self-indulgent. He built the Colosseum on the site of Nero's artificial lake in the grounds of the Domus Aurea, giving back to the people what Nero had taken for himself. He restored the finances of the empire with ruthless efficiency and a famous willingness to tax absolutely everything, including, notoriously, the public urinals. When his son complained that taxing urine was undignified, Vespasian held a coin to his son's nose. "Does it smell?" he asked. Money, Vespasian understood, has no smell. It just works. The greatest of all Rome's emperors, by the judgment of history, came in the 2nd century AD, a period historians call the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius. 5 men in succession, each one choosing his successor, based not on blood but on merit, who gave Rome its golden age. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest extent, stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. Trajan was a soldier's emperor, always at the front, always with the legions, beloved by his troops, with the fierce personal loyalty that Caesar himself had inspired. Under Hadrian, the empire consolidated. Hadrian understood what Trajan had not quite accepted, that there were limits to how far Rome could expand. and still govern effectively. He built walls. Most famously, Hadrian's Wall across northern Britain, stretching from coast to coast, marking the northern boundary of the Roman world. A line in the earth that said, "Here is Rome. Beyond here is something else." Hadrian's Wall still stands across the windswept hills of northern England, a reminder of where the world once ended. And then came Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most extraordinary emperor Rome ever produced. Not because he was the greatest conqueror, not because he built the most monuments, but because of what he wrote in the quiet moments between military campaigns. And Marcus spent much of his reign on the Danube frontier, fighting Germanic tribes. He wrote in a private journal, not for publication, not for posterity, for himself, a series of notes and reflections and reminders in Greek, the language of philosophy, about how to live well, think clearly, act justly, how to be a good person in a world that constantly tempted power toward cruelty, how to remember, sitting on the throne of the greatest empire on earth, that you are still mortal, still human, still subject to the same fears and weaknesses as every other person. These private notes, which we call the Meditations, survived by accident, and they have never gone out of print. 2,000 years later, in a world Marcus Aurelius could not have imagined, people still read his words every day, still find comfort in them, still find wisdom. A Roman emperor's private thoughts written in a military camp on the banks of the Danube, still speaking, still reaching across the silence of all those centuries to us tonight. What made a great emperor? Looking at Rome's long list, the good and the bad, the brilliant and the mad, certain qualities appear again and again in those who governed well: self-control, the ability to hold absolute power and not be destroyed by it, to remember, even at the height of glory, that power is a responsibility, not a reward. Augustus had it. Marcus Aurelius had it. Hadrian had it. Caligula and Nero did not. Curiosity. The best emperors were endlessly curious about the world they governed. Hadrian traveled constantly, visiting every province, inspecting every frontier, learning what his empire actually looked like on the ground. Claudius read everything. Marcus Aurelius studied philosophy his entire life. And perhaps most importantly, the ability to choose good advisors and listen to them. Rome's greatest emperors understood something that its worst ones forgot: that no single mind, however brilliant, can see everything. That wisdom requires other voices, other perspectives, other eyes looking at the same problem from different angles. The emperor who listened built an empire. The emperor who stopped listening built a prison for himself. The last of the truly great emperors was Diocletian. We have met him briefly before. The soldier from the Balkans who stabilized Rome during the crisis of the 3rd century. What made Diocletian remarkable was not his military victories, though there were many. It was what he did at the end. In 305 AD, after 20 years of rule that had genuinely saved the Roman Empire from collapse, Diocletian retired voluntarily. He went to his palace in Split, on the coast of modern Croatia, and grew cabbages. When his former colleagues begged him to come back to help resolve a new political crisis, he refused. "You should come and see the cabbages I have grown," he said. "Then you would not ask me to give up this happiness for power." The man who had held the fate of the world in his hands chose cabbages and was content. Perhaps that is the greatest wisdom of all, to know when to let go, to find in the simplest things a garden, a quiet evening, the work of ordinary hands, something that power could never give you, something real, something enough. The emperors of Rome, brilliant and mad, wise and cruel, great and deeply ordinary, all of them human, all of them carrying a weight that would have crushed most people, and crushed many of them too. But the best of them, Augustus planting the seeds of civilization, Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent by lamplight, Diocletian tending his garden, Claudius reading behind his curtain. The best of them remind us that power is not the point, that what matters at the end of a life, any life, emperor or not, is whether you tried to do what was right, whether you left things a little better than you found them, whether you were, in your best moments, kind. Let the palace lights dim now. Let the emperors rest in the long darkness of history. They have earned their sleep, and so have you. Breathe in slowly and out. Let your body sink deeper into warmth and rest. The story of Rome continues. We have walked with Caesar. We have stood in the temples of the gods. We have felt the ash of Pompeii beneath our feet. We have met the emperors, the great and the terrible. Now, we turn to a story that history has not always told loudly enough. The story of Roman women, the mothers and daughters, the wives and widows, the priestesses and poets, the businesswomen and the empresses who stood behind Rome's grand official history, and very often held it together. Rome was officially a man's world. The laws said so, the Senate said so, the army said so, but Rome, like every civilization that has ever existed, was built by everyone, men and women both. Tonight we remember the women. Let us begin with the law, because understanding what Roman law said about women helps us understand how extraordinary it was when women transcended it. In the early Republic, a Roman woman was legally under the authority of a man her entire life. First her father, then her husband, then, if widowed, a male guardian. She could not vote. She could not hold public office. She could not serve in the army. She could not speak in court on her own behalf. On paper, she was a dependent, a ward, a possession almost. But Rome was a practical civilization, and practical civilizations have a way of bending their own rules when reality demands it. By the late Republic and the imperial period, Roman women of the upper classes had accumulated rights and freedoms that would have surprised their grandmothers. They could own property, run businesses, divorce their husbands, receive an education, attend the theater and the games and public events, move through public life with a freedom that women in many other ancient civilizations did not have. The gap between what the law said and what women actually did was very wide indeed. The most powerful woman in the early empire, was not an empress. She was a mother. Her name was Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, mother of Tiberius, grandmother and great-grandmother of emperors. She lived to be 86, an extraordinary age for any person in the ancient world, and for those 86 years, she was at the center of Roman power. Augustus consulted her on everything. He wrote her letters when they were apart. Formal, carefully worded letters that nonetheless reveal how much he valued her judgment. She managed the vast household of the imperial palace, hundreds of slaves and freedmen, endless logistics, the daily machinery of running the center of the world. She corresponded with provincial governors and foreign kings who sought her influence. With her husband, after Augustus died, she continued to exert enormous influence, perhaps too much, for her son Tiberius's comfort. The Senate, after her death, voted her divine honors. She became Diva Augusta, the divine Augusta, a goddess, because Rome understood, even if it didn't always say so loudly, that she had been one of the people who made the empire work. Not all powerful Roman women worked quietly behind the scenes. Some were impossible to ignore. Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, was perhaps the most openly ambitious woman in Roman history. She had survived a childhood of extraordinary danger. Her father Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances. Her mother was exiled and starved to death by the Emperor Tiberius. Her brothers were destroyed, one by imperial paranoia. Agrippina survived it all, and when she finally reached a position of power as the wife of Emperor Claudius and mother of the heir, she used it with a ruthlessness that made even Rome's most hardened politicians uneasy. She secured Nero's succession. She managed her husband's court. She appeared on coins, the first living Roman woman to do so as an equal partner of the emperor. Her portrait, her name, on the money of the empire, a statement that needed no words. She was eventually killed by her own son. Nero, who owed her everything, found her power intolerable. But even in death, Agrippina was not easily dismissed. When the assassins arrived at her villa, she reportedly bared her stomach to their swords and said, "Strike here, the womb that bore Nero." Even at the end, magnificent. Away from the palace and the politics, ordinary Roman women lived full and complicated lives. The wealthy women of the upper classes were educated, often remarkably well. They read Greek and Latin. They studied philosophy and rhetoric. They wrote poetry and letters that were circulated and admired. One of the most celebrated poets of the late Republic was a woman named Sulpicia, whose love poems survive to this day, direct and unashamed and completely at odds with the image of the modest, silent Roman matron. She wrote about love, the way a person actually experiences love, with desire and frustration, and joy and the particular ache of wanting someone who does not always want you back. Her poems are 2,000 years old. They feel like they were written yesterday, because human hearts do not change, whatever century they beat in. Roman women ran businesses. This is perhaps the fact that most surprises modern people, who assume ancient women were entirely confined to the home. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii and other sites shows women as owners of bakeries, shops, taverns, textile businesses. A woman named Eumakia, a wealthy businesswoman in Pompeii, funded the construction of a large public building in the Forum, dedicated to concord and piety. Her statue stood inside it, her name carved in stone on the facade, a businesswoman's monument to herself. In the center of the city, paid for by her own money, the full ones, the cloth workers of Pompeii, dedicated their guild's building to Eumakia, because she was their patron, their benefactor, a woman of commerce and civic generosity. In a world that officially told her she needed a man's permission to act, she acted anyway, and left her name in stone for 2,000 years. The Vestal Virgins. We have met them briefly, tending the sacred flame in the round temple, in the Forum, but they deserve more than a brief mention, because the Vestals were, in many ways, the most powerful women in Rome. 6 women, chosen in childhood, between the ages of 6 and 10, serving for 30 years in the service of Vesta. During their service, they were free in ways that no other Roman woman could be. No father's authority, no husband's authority, no guardian. They answered only to the goddess and to the Pontifex Maximus, the head of Roman religion. They had their own income, their own property, their own legal standing. At the games they sat in the best seats in the Colosseum, better than senators, better than generals. When a condemned man was being led to execution, and a Vestal happened to see him, she could free him with a single word. No appeal, no process, no override. Her word was law. And at dinner parties, at religious ceremonies, in the Forum, when a Vestal entered, men of power stepped aside. 6 women, in exchange for 30 years of service and the sacred flame, more freedom than almost anyone else in Rome. The women of the provinces and the lower classes left fewer written records, but archaeology speaks for them. Tombstones, the great democratic record of the ancient world, where ordinary families recorded their love in stone because they could afford nothing more permanent, tell us their names, their ages, their occupations, the words their husbands and children chose to remember them by. To the most devoted wife, the sweetest mother, she managed the household with great skill. She was faithful and kind. Simple words, but underneath them, real lives. Women who worked in shops and fields and kitchens, who raised children in cramped insular apartments, who buried husbands and sometimes children, who grew old and were mourned sincerely by the people they had spent their lives caring for. Not empresses, not Vestals, not poets, just people doing the work that keeps the world running and being loved for it by those who knew them best. One more woman deserves her place in this story. She was not Roman at all, but she faced Rome, faced the full weight of its legions and its power, with a courage that Romans themselves could not help but admire. Her name was Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe, in Roman Britain, in 60 AD, after the Romans treated her people with particular brutality following her husband's death. seizing their lands, flogging Boudica herself, harming her daughters. She rose in revolt. She united the tribes of southeastern Britain. She burned Camulodunum, modern Colchester, to the ground. She burned Londinium, London, to the ground. She burned Verulamium, modern St. Albans, to the ground. 3 Roman cities, destroyed in weeks. The Roman governor fled before her. For a brief, burning moment, it seemed like Britain might be lost to Rome forever. The Romans eventually regrouped, defeated her in a final battle. Boudica died, whether by poison she took herself or by illness. The sources disagree, but she is remembered. In Britain she has never been forgotten. Her statue stands today beside the Thames in London, the city she burned, chariot and spear, facing toward the Parliament of a nation that did not yet exist when she lived, still fierce, still there. What do we learn from the women of Rome? We learn that history is always more complicated than it first appears, that the story told by official records, by the Senate's decrees, and the general's triumphs, is only part of the story. The other part was being lived quietly and loudly by the people the records did not always bother to name. Roman women managed households that were small economies. They raised the children who became the soldiers and senators and emperors. They ran the businesses that fed and clothed the city. They kept the sacred flame burning for 1,000 years. They wrote the poems that still move us. They led the revolts that shook the empire. They whispered in the right ears at the right moments and changed the course of events that history attributed to their husbands. Rome was not built by men alone. It never is. It never has been. Any civilization you care to name was built by everyone in it. The recorded and the unrecorded. The famous and the forgotten. The powerful and the quiet. All of them together, building something larger than any one of them. Tonight, before we sleep, let us remember some names. Livia, who held the empire together for 50 years of marriage and outlived everyone. Agrippina, who was magnificent even at the end. Sulpicia, who wrote about love honestly when honesty was rare. Eumacia, who built a monument to herself with her own money and deserved every stone of it. The Vestals, whose names we mostly do not know, whose flame burned for 1,000 years. Boudica, who burned 3 cities rather than accept injustice quietly. And the unnamed millions. The baker's wife in Pompeii, who shaped bread in the dark before dawn every morning. The soldier's mother in a provincial town who watched her son march away and waited years for his return. The slave woman who raised a rich family's children with the same love she would have given her own. History does not always write their names, but they were there. They were real. They mattered. And tonight, we remember them. Let the women of Rome rest now in the cool marble houses and the cramped insular rooms, in the Temple of Vesta, where the flame still glows, in the British hills, where Boudica's last battle was fought, in the Pompeii bakery, where bread was made before the mountain woke, in the tombs where loving families carved simple true words into stone, because love needs to be said somewhere that lasts They lived. They worked and loved, and struggled and endured. They built a world, with their hands and their minds and their hearts. And then they rested. As we rest now, breathe slowly, in and out. The warmth of sleep surrounds you. You are safe. You are held. Breathe in slowly, and out. Let the warmth of sleep settle over you now. The story of Rome continues. We have walked with Caesar. We have honored the gods. We have stood in the ash of Pompeii. We have met the emperors and the women who shaped the empire from the shadows. Now, we do something simpler, something more human. We eat, because no civilization can be understood without understanding what it put on its table. Food is not just fuel. It is culture. It is identity. It is the daily ritual that reminds us who we are and where we belong. And Rome, that great, complicated, magnificent civilization, had opinions about food, very strong opinions. Tonight we sit at the Roman table, and we feast. The Roman day started early, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern hills. Romans were already moving. Breakfast, the ientaculum, was simple, almost absurdly so, by modern standards. Bread, that was the foundation of the Roman diet at every meal and every level of society. Flat bread, round bread, bread baked in molds, bread stamped with a baker's mark, bread sold warm from the oven at the corner bakery before dawn. With the bread, olives perhaps, a bit of cheese, some fruit if it was the season for it, wine heavily diluted with water. Romans considered drinking undiluted wine barbaric, and started their day with a cup so watered down it was barely more than flavored water. That was breakfast. Quick, practical, eaten standing up often, or walking to work. Romans did not linger over breakfast. They had a city to run. The midday meal, the prandium, was not much more elaborate. Rome's working day ran from dawn to midday. The afternoon heat drove the city indoors. The prandium was eaten quickly, cold food, mostly since cooking fires were not lit. Twice in a day, in most Roman homes, leftovers from the night before. More bread, more olives, hard-boiled eggs, dried figs, cold meat if you could afford it, eaten in the shade, washed down with more watered wine, and then, for those who could, a rest. The Romans understood the wisdom of the afternoon rest that Mediterranean cultures have practiced for thousands of years. The body, in the heat of an Italian afternoon, does not want to work. The wise Roman listened to his body and slept. We could learn something from this. The real meal, the meal that mattered, was the cena, the evening dinner. For wealthy Romans, this was not merely eating. It was theater. It was politics. It was philosophy. It was the main social event of the day. Guests were invited, carefully chosen, their ranking and importance reflected in where they reclined at the table. Yes, reclined. Romans ate lying down on long cushioned couches, triclinia arranged in a U shape around a low central table. 3 couches, 3 people per couch. 9 guests was the traditional ideal number. For a Roman dinner party. Enough for good conversation. Not so many that conversation became impossible. The host reclined at the center of the central couch, the position of honor. The most important guest reclined to his left, and the feast began. What did they eat? For the wealthy, almost everything the known world could provide. The Roman Empire was the greatest trading network the ancient world had ever seen. Pepper from India, so valuable it was used as currency. Silphium from North Africa, a herb so prized and so heavily harvested that it went extinct. Dates from Egypt, garum from Spain, that beloved fermented fish sauce that Romans put on absolutely everything, the way modern people use ketchup or soy sauce. Honey from Greece, oysters from Britain, wine from Gaul. A Roman feast was a tour of the empire. On a single table, the appetizers, the gustatio, might include eggs, olives, salted fish, vegetables and vinegar. Then the main courses, the prima mensa, meat, fish, elaborate, prepared dishes that Roman cooks spent hours constructing. Then the dessert, the secunda mensa, fruit, nuts, honey cakes, sweet wine, and throughout all of it, wine, always wine. What did they eat? For the wealthy, almost everything the known world could provide. The Roman Empire was the greatest trading network the ancient world had ever seen. Pepper from India, so valuable it was used as currency. Silphium from North Africa, a herb so prized and so heavily harvested that it went extinct. Dates from Egypt, garum from Spain, that beloved fermented fish sauce that Romans put on absolutely everything, the way modern people use ketchup or soy sauce. Honey from Greece, oysters from Britain, wine from Gaul. A Roman feast was a tour of the empire. On a single table, the appetizers, the gustatio, might include eggs, olives, salted fish, vegetables and vinegar. Then the main courses, the prima mensa, meat, fish, elaborate, prepared dishes that Roman cooks spent hours constructing. Then the dessert, the secunda mensa, fruit, nuts, honey cakes, sweet wine, and throughout all of it, wine, always wine. Garum. We must speak more of garum, because Romans were obsessed with it. It appears in nearly every recipe in Apicius. It was the seasoning that went on everything: meat, fish, vegetables, sauces, even some sweet dishes. What was it? Fish sauce, made by layering small fish, anchovies, mackerel, sardines, with large quantities of salt, in large clay vessels, left in the sun for months. The fish slowly broke down, liquefied, and the resulting liquid, strained and bottled, was garum. It sounds appalling. It was apparently delicious. The best garum, from factories in Spain and North Africa, was exported in sealed amphoras across the entire empire. Expensive, prized, given as gifts. Modern food scientists who have reconstructed ancient garum say it tastes remarkably like the finest Southeast Asian fish sauces available today, which makes sense, because the principle is identical. Fermented fish, umami, the deep savory taste that humans have been seeking for as long as we have been cooking. Rome found it, put it on everything, and was happy. The poor ate differently. For the vast majority of Romans, the shopkeepers and laborers and slaves who made the city run, the lavish feasts of the wealthy were a distant fantasy. Their diet was simpler. Grain was the foundation, wheat and barley, ground into flour, and made into bread, or cooked into a thick porridge called pulse, the Roman equivalent of polenta. Legumes, lentils, chickpeas, beans, provided protein. Vegetables, onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, whatever was in season and affordable. Olive oil was cheap, enough for most Romans. Used for cooking, for lighting lamps, for bathing. It was perhaps the single most important product in the Roman world. Cheap wine, heavily watered, and occasionally, as a treat, as a festival special, as something to mark a good day. A bit of meat, not much, not often, but enough to make the ordinary day feel for a moment extraordinary. The Roman state fed its citizens. This is not a small thing. The grain dole, the annona, was one of Rome's most important institutions. Free grain, later free bread, distributed to Roman citizens every month. At its height, perhaps 200,000 Roman citizens received the grain dole. It was expensive. It required a vast administrative apparatus. Ships bringing grain from Egypt and North Africa, warehouses storing it, officials distributing it. But Rome paid for it, because a hungry city is an unstable city, and Rome's emperors, whatever their other faults, understood the basic equation of urban governance. That has not changed in 2,000 years. Feed the people, or face the consequences. The poet Juvenal called it, with magnificent cynicism, bread and circuses. Give the people food and entertainment, he said, and they will not trouble you about how you govern. He meant it as a criticism, but as a description of what keeps a million-person city from tearing itself apart. It was simply accurate. Wine deserves its own moment, because Rome ran on wine, not the heavy, intoxicating wine of modern imagination. Romans, as we have noted, almost always diluted their wine with water, sometimes 2 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes 3 to 1. Undiluted wine was for barbarians and alcoholics. Respectable Romans drank their wine properly watered, but they drank a great deal of it with every meal, at social gatherings, at religious ceremonies. Wine was poured as a libation to the gods, before every dinner party, after battles. Before them, the Roman wine industry was vast. Vineyards covered the hills of Italy, Gaul, Spain, Greece, North Africa. Different regions produced different styles, just as they still do today. The finest wines from Campania, from the slopes of Vesuvius itself, were aged in sealed amphoras for decades. Old Falernian wine from the volcanic hills north of Naples was the most prized of all. Rich, deep, strong, even when diluted. The wine of emperors, the wine of the gods, aging in darkness for 20, 30, 40 years. Until some fortunate Roman opened the seal and poured it into a silver cup and tasted time itself. At the great feasts of the wealthy, the entertainment never stopped. Between courses, musicians played, acrobats performed, poets recited, sometimes their own work, sometimes the classics, Virgil's Aeneid passages, that every educated Roman knew by heart. Philosophers debated, guests argued about politics and literature, and the proper way to cook a fish. The best Roman dinner parties were not about food at all. They were about conversation, about the pleasure of good minds meeting around a shared table, about the ancient and never diminishing joy of sitting with people you like, or at least find interesting, and talking late into the night, over wine, over food, over the small but essential ceremony of eating together, which is perhaps the oldest human ritual of all, older than cities, older than writing, older than Rome. The gathering around the fire, the sharing of what the day has provided, the voices in the darkness. We have been doing it since the beginning. We are doing it still. Let the feast end gently now. Let the last wine cup be set down. Let the musicians play their final notes and fall silent. Let the guests drift away into the warm Roman night, talking still, laughing still, carrying the evening's conversation home with them, like a lamp against the dark. Let the servants clear the table quietly. Let the kitchen fires burn down to embers. Let the house grow still, full, warm, content with the ancient and irreplaceable pleasure of a good meal shared with people who matter. This is what Rome knew, what every civilization has always known, that we are not meant to eat alone, that the table is where we remember who we are to each other. Rest now. You are full. You are warm. You are held in the long story of human hunger and human satisfaction. Breathe slowly, in and out. One more chapter waits for morning. Good night. Breathe in slowly and out. Let your body grow heavy and warm. This is the final chapter of Rome's story tonight. We have come so far together. We have walked with Caesar across the Rubicon. We have stood in the temples of the gods. We have felt the ash of Pompeii. We have met the emperors, the great and the terrible. We have remembered the women who held the empire together. We have feasted at the Roman table. And now we look up at the arches and the domes and the columns and the aqueducts, at the things Romans built with their hands and their minds and their extraordinary engineering genius, things that still stand 2,000 years later, still standing, still teaching us what human beings are capable of when they refuse to accept limits. Tonight, we build Rome. Before we speak of specific buildings, we must speak of one material, one invention so important, so transformative, so fundamental to everything Rome built, that without it, none of the rest was possible. Concrete. Roman concrete. The Romans did not invent concrete. Earlier civilizations had used similar materials, but they perfected it. They discovered, through centuries of experimentation, a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, seawater, and aggregate that set harder and stronger than almost anything else available to the ancient world. And crucially, it set underwater. This meant Romans could build harbor structures, bridge foundations, massive underwater platforms, things that no previous civilization had been able to construct. Modern scientists who have analyzed Roman concrete from structures 2,000 years old have made a startling discovery. Roman concrete gets stronger over time. The seawater reacts with the volcanic ash over centuries, growing new mineral crystals that reinforce the structure. Our modern concrete degrades over decades. Roman concrete improves over millennia. They accidentally invented the most durable building material in human history, and then built an empire with it. The arch. If concrete was Rome's greatest material, the arch was Rome's greatest structural idea. The Romans did not invent the arch either, but they used it with an obsessive, systematic, revolutionary thoroughness that no previous civilization had approached. The principle of the arch is elegant and counterintuitive. A flat beam, a stone or wooden lintel, laid horizontally, can only span a limited distance before it cracks under its own weight and the weight above it. But an arch, stones or bricks arranged in a curve, each one pressing against the next, distributes the weight outward and downward into the supports on either side. The heavier the load above, the stronger the arch becomes. It is held together by the very forces trying to pull it apart. Romans looked at this principle and saw infinite possibility. Arched doorways, arched bridges, arched aqueducts marching across valleys on tier after tier of arches, arched tunnels through mountains, arched vaults creating vast interior spaces that no flat-roofed building could achieve. The arch gave Rome the ability to span distances and enclose spaces that had been simply impossible before, and Rome used it everywhere. The aqueducts. Of all Rome's engineering achievements, the aqueducts may be the most impressive, not the most beautiful, not the most dramatic, but the most important, because without water, a city of 1 million people cannot exist. Rome's aqueducts brought fresh water from mountain springs and rivers, sometimes 50, sometimes 100, sometimes more than 90 kilometers away, into the city, continuously, every day, all day. The water never stopped flowing. 11 major aqueducts served Rome by the height of the empire, delivering an estimated 1 million cubic meters of fresh water every day. 1 million cubic meters, more water per person than many modern cities provide. The engineering required to achieve this was extraordinary. Aqueducts had to maintain a precise, gentle downward slope, steep enough to keep the water flowing, shallow enough to prevent erosion of the channel, over distances of many kilometers, across hills and valleys, and rivers and gorges. That slope had to be maintained to within millimeters per 100 meters, with no instruments beyond a simple level and a measuring rod. And they did it again and again. In Spain, in France, in North Africa, in Asia Minor, wherever Rome went, water followed. carried on the backs of stone arches, marching across the landscape. One of the most beautiful sights the ancient world produced. The Pantheon. If you could visit only one Roman building, only one in all of Rome's 2,000 years of construction, go to the Pantheon. It stands in the heart of modern Rome, surrounded now by restaurants and tourists, and the noise of a living city. And it has stood there, essentially unchanged, for nearly 1900 years. It was built by the Emperor Hadrian around 125 AD, though it stands on the site of an earlier building by Agrippa, whose name still appears on the facade. From the outside, it is impressive but not overwhelming. A rectangular porch of massive granite columns, a simple triangular pediment. Then you walk through the bronze doors, the original bronze doors, still on their hinges after 19 centuries, and you stop because nothing prepares you for what is inside. The interior of the Pantheon is a perfect sphere. Imagine a ball, a perfect, enormous ball, sitting on the ground. The height from the floor to the top of the dome is exactly equal to the diameter of the interior, 43 meters, in every direction. A perfect sphere of space, enclosed in concrete and stone. At the very top of the dome, 9 meters across, is an opening, the oculus, the eye, open to the sky. No glass, no cover, just a circle of sky, 9 meters wide, hovering 43 meters above your head. When it rains inside the Pantheon. The floor, slightly domed, drains through holes in the marble. When the sun moves, a great disk of light moves slowly across the interior walls and floor, marking the passage of the day, like the world's largest sundial. At noon on certain days, the sun shines directly through the oculus and falls on the entrance, illuminating anyone who enters, as if the building itself is watching. The dome of the Pantheon remained the largest concrete dome in the world for over 1,300 years, until Brunelleschi built the dome of Florence Cathedral in the 15th century, using techniques he studied by measuring the Pantheon, Roman engineering, teaching the Renaissance how to build across 13 centuries from the grave. The roads. We have mentioned them before, in passing, in the context of legions and trade and the spread of Christianity, but they deserve their moment, because the Roman road network was perhaps the single greatest engineering achievement of the ancient world. 400,000 kilometers of roads, stretching from the northern tip of Britain to the eastern edge of Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara, built to a standard that remained unmatched for over 1,000 years. After Rome fell, the construction of a Roman road was a precise, layered process. First, the surveyors went ahead, laying out the route in as straight a line as the terrain allowed. Romans preferred straight roads. Straight roads were faster. Faster roads moved armies and supplies more efficiently. If a hill was in the way, they went over it. If a valley was in the way, they bridged it. If a forest was in the way, they cut through it. The road went where Rome decided it would go, not where the landscape thought it should. Then the construction began. Workers, usually legionaries, supervised by military engineers, dug down to solid ground, then built up in layers. A foundation of large stones, a layer of smaller stones, and gravel, a layer of concrete, a surface of large flat, fitted stones, slightly curved so water drained to the ditches on either side. The whole construction might be a meter deep, built to last, and last it did. Many Roman roads are still in use today. Beneath the tarmac of modern highways, the Roman surface lies undisturbed. The road from London to York, Ermine Street, still influences the route of the modern, a one highway, the Via Appia, the Appian Way, Rome's oldest major road, begun in 312 BC, still exists outside Rome. You can walk on it, on the original stones, worn smooth by 2,000 years of feet. Roman sandals and medieval boots and Renaissance shoes and modern trainers, all of them walking the same road, all of them connected, without knowing it, to the Roman engineer who first laid those stones in place. The Baths of Caracalla, built in the early 3rd century AD. They were not the largest baths in Rome. The baths of Diocletian were larger, but they are perhaps the best preserved, or least destroyed, and they give us the clearest picture of what a great imperial therme looked like. The main bathing block alone was 220 meters long. Inside it, simultaneously at any time, 1,600 people could bathe. The hot rooms, the warm rooms, the cold rooms, all heated by the hypocaust system, a raised floor through which hot air from furnaces below circulated continuously. The floor you walked on was warm to the touch. The walls were lined with marble, colored marble from across the empire, Egyptian granite, Greek marble, yellow marble from Tunisia, green marble from Greece. The vaulted ceilings soared 30 meters above, decorated with mosaics and painted plaster, lit by great windows that filled the interior with Mediterranean light. Around the bathing block, gardens, libraries, exercise halls, shops and snack bars. A city within the city, where 1,600 people could spend an entire afternoon and emerge clean, relaxed, educated, fed, and socially fulfilled. For the price of almost nothing, the Romans understood public infrastructure in a way that still feels radical today, that the things which make life civilized, water, cleanliness, space for the body and the mind, should be available to everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the powerful, everyone. Hadrian's Wall. We have mentioned it briefly, but standing before it, even in your imagination, deserves a longer moment. 73 miles long, stretching from the Solway Firth on the west coast of Britain to the River Tyne on the east. Begun around 122 AD, under the Emperor Hadrian, during his visit to Britain, built in about 6 years, by legionaries, 3 legions, 15,000 men, 6 years, 73 miles of wall, up to 6 meters high, 3 meters wide at the base, with a fort every 5 Roman miles, a smaller fortlet, A mile castle, every Roman mile, and watchtowers every third of a mile between. It was not just a wall, it was a complete military and administrative system, controlling movement, collecting customs duties, monitoring the frontier. It sat on the landscape of northern Britain like a declaration. This is where Rome ends. This is the edge of the civilized world, as we have defined it. Beyond here, the unconquered north, the tribes who would not submit, the cold hills and the gray skies and the world that Rome decided was not worth the cost of conquest. Hadrian's Wall still stands. Not all of it. Not to its original height. But in places. In the wild Northumberland countryside. Following the ridge of the Windsill escarpment. You can walk along it. The same stones the legionaries laid. Looking north, as they looked north. Into the wind. Into the unconquered dark. And feel, for a moment, what it meant to stand at the edge of the world. What is the legacy of Roman architecture? It is everywhere, so completely embedded in the visual language of Western civilization that we no longer even see it as Roman. The columns on the front of your government buildings Roman, the dome on your Capitol building descended from the Pantheon, the triumphal arch, copied so many times, in so many cities, that we forget who invented it. The grid plan of your city streets, derived from the Roman military camp, the Basilica, the Roman Hall of Justice, that became the template for the Christian Church. Every cathedral in Europe, every courthouse in America, every bank that wants to look solid and permanent, is saying in the language of stone and column, we are serious, we will endure, we are built to last. And they learned to say it from Rome, from the engineers and architects who stood on the Capitoline Hill 2,000 years ago and looked out over the 7 hills of their city, and decided that what they built would outlast everything that had ever come before. They were right. Not Rome's end. Rome has no end. Not really. But the end of our journey through it. We have covered so much ground. The 7 hills where a legend began. The Senate where words were sharpest weapons. The Colosseum where 80,000 voices shook the ground. Augustus who built an empire from ruins. The streets and baths and markets of a city that never slept. The legions marching across the known world. The fall that was not really a fall at all, but a transformation. Caesar crossing the Rubicon in the dark. Gods in their temples receiving the smoke of 1,000,000 offerings. Pompeii sleeping under its blanket of ash. Emperors great and terrible. Women whose names history did not always bother to record, but whose hands held the world together. Food and wine and the ancient joy of sitting with other humans around a shared table. And the buildings still standing, still teaching, still saying, in the language of stone and arch and dome, we were here. We built something. We tried to make something that would last. And it did. It does. It will. Let Rome sleep now. The eternal city, in the eternal dark. The Pantheon's oculus, showing a circle of stars to an empty interior. the aqueducts murmuring. In the moonlit countryside, Hadrian's wall cold and silver in the northern night, the roads stretching out in every direction, straight as intention, patient as stone, and somewhere, in all of that beautiful, complicated, magnificent, terrible, extraordinary story, us, small and temporary, and utterly human, listening to the past, speak to us across the silence of centuries, because it still has things to tell us, because we still need to hear them, because the past is not gone, it is the ground we stand on. Rome is beneath our feet, in the roads and the laws and the words we speak, in the way we build and govern and argue and love, in the stories we tell each other, in the dark, like this one. Rest now. You have traveled far. The eternal city surrounds you, and in its ancient, patient, enduring arms, sleep deeply, peacefully, completely. Good night, and thank you for walking through Rome with me.